Wild West Stories. She was rejected by every suitor until a cowboy said yes. Cedar Creek, Montana, 1879. A small town stretched between red dust plains and jagged mountains where the spring winds carried grit into every seam of clothing. People said there was little here but spent silver mines, a few noisy saloons, a weather-worn church, and townsfolk whose eyes mixed suspicion with curiosity. For Grace, Barkley Cedar Creek felt suffocating not only from the heavy air or the dust that clung to her worn calico dress, but from the whispers. Those whispers light as breath, yet sharp as blades cut deeper than any wound. Each step down the main street seemed to leave behind a trail of murmurs. There she is again. 7 times. Left at the altar. No wonder always reading books, always arguing with men. Who could stand that Grace had grown used to the voices, so much so that she sometimes heard them, even when the streets lay silent. For others, one broken engagement would have been enough to wound. For her, there had been 7 jiltings until she became the subject of gossip and cruel amusement. But today, as the afternoon sun slanted across the sagging awning of the general store, Grace held something different in her hands, a letter. The rounded, gentle handwriting belonged to Martha, her only cousin, still in touch since her father's death. She sat quietly at the wobbly wooden table in the small house her father had left her. The room was still save for the ticking of the clock and the wind pushing through the cracks of the door. Grace's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. "Dearest Grace," the letter began. It was as if Martha's voice filled the room warm and kind. "I've heard the rumors from Cedar Creek, and my heart aches for you. Here in Willow Springs, we are in need of a teacher. The pay is $30 a month. You may stay in my home until you find a place of your own. Willow Springs is new. No one knows your past there. You can begin again." Grace read the words again and again. A fresh start. She pressed her hands against her face. For so long she had believed there was no escape beyond Cedar Creek. Her father had died of fever 3 years ago, leaving her this house and a burden of debt. To survive, she had taught lessons, stitched clothes, worked wherever she could. And through it all, suitors had come and gone, leaving her with nothing but the bitter title, the abandoned girl. But Willow Springs, only 200 miles away, a few days' journey by stagecoach, a town still finding its shape, hungry for learning, for people who could bring civilization. Her gaze wandered around the room. Her father's books stacked upon the shelf, her mother's worn silver comb, her grandmother's quilt sewn when Grace was still a little girl, dreaming of a wedding day. Everything here was bound to the past, sweet, but also bitter. Her eyes fell on the small mirror hanging by the wall. The woman staring back was no longer the hopeful young girl of 20. Her brown eyes carried the shadow of disappointment. Her lips, once quick to smile, now rested in silence. Yet deep within those eyes, faint though it was, a spark still lingered, fragile as a dying flame but unyielding. She whispered aloud, her voice quivering yet firm, as if to bind herself with an oath, "I cannot stay here. I will not." That night, Grace pulled out a small wooden trunk. Into it she placed a few plain dresses, her father's cherished books, her mother's silver comb, and her grandmother's quilt. Just these few things, but they were her family, her legacy, her life. Outside, the new moon rose silver light spilling over the quiet streets. In the dark, Cedar Creek seemed to hold its mocking laughter its prying glances, its endless disappointments. Grace closed the trunk. Her breath trembled, but within her stirred a new feeling anticipation. Not fear, but the thrill of knowing that with one journey, one choice, she could discover another version of herself. Tomorrow, Cedar Creek would be nothing more than memory. And she, Grace Barkley, would be gone seeking a different beginning. Part 1. The Journey of Destiny. The stagecoach jolted violently as its wheels sank into a deep patch of mud. Outside, spring rain poured without pause, lashing against the clouded windows, joined by the distant rumble of thunder rolling from the western mountains. Grace pressed herself into the wooden seat, clutching tightly to the wool blanket, already damp from the storm. Her few books and belongings rested neatly at her feet, rattling with every shock of the wheels. The roads flooding, the driver shouted through the curtain of rain, straining to keep the reins steady as the horses skittered nervously. If this keeps up, I doubt we'll reach Willow Springs on time. Grace said nothing, only nodded faintly, her wire-rimmed spectacles sliding down her nose. And in that moment, she felt a strange lightness. Once every mishap, every whisper in Cedar Creek had crushed her beneath shame and fear. But now, far from it all, even this sodden road felt like a challenge she was ready to face. Perhaps because in her mind, the words, "a different beginning," echoed, still feeding the fragile flame within her chest. Then came the sound of hooves behind them, firm, rhythmic cutting, even through the rain drumming on the roof. The driver glanced over his shoulder, voice rough with unease. "Someone's coming up fast." Grace drew back the curtain and squinted through the gray downpour. And then she saw him, a tall figure astride a powerful chestnut horse. He wore no heavy cloak like city travelers. Instead, a rain-darkened buckskin jacket, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over half his face, and at his side, the gleam of a silver revolver. The stranger urged his horse forward, pulling even with the coach. The beat of its hooves struck like the quickened pulse in Grace's chest. "This road's dangerous, miss," his voice carried strong and steady through the storm, the voice of a man accustomed to wind and wilderness. "Bandits often lurk in the passes ahead." Grace slid the window open, a crack rain striking her cheek. She forced her voice calm. "I'm bound for Willow Springs. The new school teacher. I can't afford to lose the time." The man smiled, sudden and disarming, a flash of warmth lighting his blue eyes beneath the brim. "Name's Finn Westfield. I'm headed that way too. If you don't mind, I'll ride along. Safer to have another gun at your side." Before Grace could reply, the driver cheered aloud. "Well, praise the Lord for that. I've been dreading road thieves since yesterday." Grace only nodded, her hands tightening around the old book on her lap. In her chest, something unfamiliar stirred, not fear, not exactly joy, but something more like a flicker of light in the storm. By late afternoon, the coach was forced to stop at a swollen creek, the wooden bridge washed away. As the passengers disembarked to rest, Grace stepped down, drawing a deep breath. The air was heavy, with the scent of wet earth and pine fresher than anything she had ever breathed in Cedar Creek. Finn stood nearby, tending to his horse, broad shoulders, steady against the storm's weight. Noticing her glance, he tipped his hat. Traveling so far alone, that's rare. Grace hesitated. Memories of ridicule, of being abandoned, rose unbidden. Yet Finn's eyes held no judgment, only curiosity and a measure of genuine concern. Quietly, she answered, I just needed somewhere new to begin. Willow Springs seemed fitting. Finn nodded, blue eyes glinting with understanding. He asked nothing more, pressed for nothing. Instead, he tossed a dry branch onto the driver's fire. Flames flared their light, dancing across Grace's face. And in that glow, she realized she was no longer shrinking back. Among storm and hardship, a stranger had made her feel, for the first time in years, seen. That night, they camped by the creek. The crackle of fire mingled with the hum of insects. Grace sat curled with a book, softly reading a few lines of Wordsworth. A sudden warm laugh startled her. She looked up to find Finn watching, eyes bright with interest. I was never much for poetry, he said, but hearing you read it makes me think the children of Willow Springs will be mighty fortunate. A wave of warmth swept through Grace's chest. For so long, people had mocked her as too bookish, too proud of her reading. But here in the firelight and chill of night, a man spoke the opposite, that her love of knowledge was not a burden, but a gift. She smiled, then lips trembling. For the first time in months, it was a smile unforced, unhidden. By dawn, the mud was still thick and treacherous, yet Grace felt the road less heavy. Within her, a fragile green shoot had begun to push through the hardened soil of disappointment. She did not yet dare to name it nor trust it to last. But deep within, she knew she had stepped into destiny. And it had begun in the storm when a cowboy named Finn Westfield rode up beside a struggling stagecoach. A meeting that seemed chance, but to Grace, it was the first sign that perhaps fate had not turned wholly against her. Part 2. The New School. The morning sun rose over the distant mountains, casting gold across the Willow Springs Valley. The town was young, only a few years old, yet already pulsing with life, like a place long established. Men hauled timber down the road. Women pinned laundry on lines. Children played along the dirt path marked by wagon wheels. The air carried an energy unlike Cedar Creek, not suffocating, not oppressive, but open, welcoming. Grace stepped down from the stagecoach, her pale blue dress dusted from the road spectacles slipping low on her nose. Her heartbeat quick part, anxious part, exhilarated. This was not just a journey. It was the beginning of another life. Martha hurried out from the front of the general store and wrapped her in a tight embrace. Grace, oh, how glad I am to see you. That simple, warm hug cracked the ice around Grace's heart. For the first time in years, she felt she belonged. James, Martha's husband, nodded politely and lifted Grace's small trunk with ease. You'll stay with us a few days, Martha said as they walked. The little cabin behind the school we and some of the townsfolk are fixing it up. By next week, you should be able to move in. Just hearing it filled Grace with a rush of gratitude. She whispered, smiling, "Thank you. Thank you both." The next day, Martha led her to the schoolhouse. It stood at the far edge of town, set apart from the bustle of shops and wagons. A single-room wooden building with a sloped roof and a small bell tower above. Yet when Grace reached the door, her heart fluttered as though she were holding chalk before a class for the first time. The hinges groaned as she pushed it open. Inside, sunlight spilled through dusty windows, falling over rows of rough-hewn benches. A teacher's desk sat on a low platform. In the corner, an old cast-iron stove. On the wall hung a map of America, its edges frayed. Grace drew a long breath. The scents of aged wood, worn books, and old smoke filled the air wholly in its way. Not a church, but a temple of knowledge. "It isn't much to look at," James said, almost apologetic. "But the council approved money for new benches, more books. We're hoping you can make this a true school." Grace turned her eyes alight. "It's already beautiful, James. To me, this place is worth more than any grand hall." On Monday, the small bell rang out in the breeze, calling children to their first lesson. Grace's heart pounded as she watched them arrive in groups clothed simple, some barefoot, but their eyes alight with curiosity. Some could read a little children of townsfolk. Others from distant farms had never held a book. She stood at the front, hands trembling on the worn Bible. Dozens of eyes fixed upon her, expectant. "Good morning." Her voice began softly, then steadied. "My name is Grace Barkley. I am here to teach you to read, to write, and to understand the great world beyond these hills." The children's eyes shone. A tousle-haired boy raised his hand. "Ma'am, will you teach us numbers too?" "My pa says, if I can reckon, I can keep the cattle better." The room burst with laughter. Grace laughed as well, nodding. "Of course. Mathematics is the language of life. We will begin with numbers." That morning, she chalked the first letters on the board, dust rising with each stroke. Voices rang out, the children spelling ABC in unison. Turning back, Grace saw sunlight falling on their eager faces, and joy welled within her, sharp and radiant. This was the moment she had dreamed of. No more whispers of shame, no more burden of rejection. Only her and these young souls waiting to be guided. The days soon fell into rhythm. At dawn, she rang the bell. By day, she taught letters, sums, and stories. At night, she prepared her little cabin behind the school. James and the other men patched the roof and fitted windows. Martha brought bedding and dishes. The cabin was small, one room for sleeping, a corner for cooking. But to Grace, it was a castle. For the first time, she had a space of her own, untouched by judgment or scorn. One evening, after wiping down the desks, she sat alone by the window. Lamplight glowed across the map she had pressed flat with care. The night wind carried the scent of pine. Her heartbeat was calm, more than it had ever been. "I have truly begun again," she thought, tears blurring her sight. "I am no longer the girl abandoned 7 times. I am the teacher of Willow Springs." Pride filled her breath, her gestures. That night she slept deeply, dreaming of light and children's laughter. Yet the path was not without thorns. On stormy days, farm children could not come. Sometimes boys quarreled and tore their books. Grace had to be stern, yet patient. Once a little girl named Clara, only 8, broke into tears when she failed to write the letter R. Grace did not scold. She knelt, took the girl's hand. "Do you know, child," she whispered, "they once said I was not good enough, but I learned little by little. And now I stand here. You can too." Clara lifted wet eyes, nodding. Slowly, shakily, her first R took form. Grace smiled, her heart blooming. Moments like these healed her. The children knew nothing of her past, offered no judgment. They only needed someone to believe in them. And in giving that faith, Grace began to believe again in herself. At times, as she cleaned the classroom, a tall figure would appear at the doorway, Finn Westfield. He often smiled, asked gently, "All well, schoolteacher? All well, thank you. Mischievous little ones, but precious." Once he helped her hang the map, reaching with ease where she could not. Another time, he brought a basket of apples for the children to share. Grace blushed at his kindness, yet warmth spread within her. His presence was a slender thread tying her small schoolhouse to the wider world. One late afternoon, with the children gone, Grace stood alone in the classroom. The sunset bathed the wooden benches, turning chalk dust into golden haze. She laid her hand on the teacher's desk and closed her eyes. And in that moment, she felt it deep and sure she was alive again. No longer Grace Barkley rejected and whispered about. She was Grace Barkley, the schoolteacher keeper of knowledge for a new generation of Willow Springs. Her heart whispered, "This is home. This is where I belong." And within her, hope had grown into a young tree, its roots sunk deep in new soil, its branches reaching for light. Part 3. The Cowboy's Silhouette. That afternoon, wind swept down from the northern hill across the grassland, carrying the scent of pine and the faint chalk dust lingering in the schoolroom. The sun tilted west, sending long shafts of light through the window so that the floating motes glittered like fireflies. Grace stood on a low wooden chair, hugging the rolled map of America to her chest, squinting to judge where a nail might make it hang straight. She had tried twice. Each time it canted to one side, and the state borders looked as if they might slide off the page. Alone in the room, she exhaled and laughed at herself. Straight as an arrow. Easy enough to say. The door swung open with a hinge squeak. Familiar boot steps crossed the floorboards. Grace started and turned the chair, wobbled. A firm hand settled on its back and steadied it. Finn Westfield lifted his hat, a quick smile, lighting his sun-browned face. "Forgive me," he said, voice low and warm. "I knocked, but I'm not sure the bell can hear." Grace flushed, clutching the map like a small shield. "It's fine. I was only trying to hang this properly." She nodded toward the wall, where two hastily driven nails showed the map listing like a skiff and chop. Finn looked up, tilting his head the way a workman sights a line. "May I?" He took the map, opening it, with those large, calm hands that might gentle a skittish horse. The old paper whispered. Rivers and ranges sprang into relief in the slanting light. "Have you a pencil?" he asked. Grace handed him a stick of charcoal. By eye, he gauged the distance from the frame to the old nail, marked 2 neat dots, then glanced around and spotted a hammer beside a pile of spelling exercises. He crossed back, set the nail, raised his arm. 3 clean blows, metal ringing sure and bright. He caught the map from Grace, hung it, then smoothed the corners. "Now it's straight as an arrow," he said, stepping back. "Or at least as straight as the arrows I put in a practice target." Grace climbed down and adjusted her glasses. The map was perfectly square, its bottom edge parallel with the molding of the dais. A queer happiness lifted in her chest, not only because the map lay true, but because the world had briefly offered someone who set things in their rightful place, lightly, decisively. "Thank you," she said, soft but clear. "I wrestled with it for an hour." Finn set the hammer down and tipped his hat with an old-fashioned courtesy. "That's the kind of thing I'm good at. You do the things I can't." His eye drifted to the chalked syllables on the board, Thuri and Farm, traced like a new fence line. "The children learned farm today," Grace explained, suddenly shy under such attentive notice. "They like to roll the R. One said it sounded like a horse's whinny." Not far off, Finn chuckled short, genuine. I brought them something." He stepped to the door and pulled in a small wooden crate from the porch-polished red apples, their scent quickening the room. "Our trees came on heavy this year. Give them out at recess, they'll nap less in lessons." "Oh, they'll be thrilled," Grace blurted. "Ben Stone nods off whenever I start a poem." She paused, embarrassed by her babbling, then smiled. "Forgive me. I talk on when it's about the children." "Talk on," Finn said gently. "If you spoke till nightfall, I think I'd still listen." The simple warmth of it sent heat to her cheeks. For years, few had encouraged her to speak, fewer still, to speak of small things, the way a child holds a pen, the way eyes shine at the first syllable knit together. Yet he stood there as if these small things were the only story worth telling. A draft puffed through the door and lifted a corner of the map. Finn reached to still it. For a heartbeat, his hand was very near hers, fingers roughened by rope and rein movement, careful as a touch to a butterfly's wing. Grace drew back her heart off tempo. Finn eased away too, as if the wind, rather than will, had widened the space. "Are you comfortable in the cabin out back?" he asked, voice returning to its steady gait. Martha said some roof boards were gapped. I had a man pitch in resin. "Storm shouldn't find you." "More comfortable than anywhere I've lived," Grace said honestly, eyes on the little window where a slip of sunlight fell through the eave. "I hear birds in the morning, simmer a bit of soup at night, and no one knocks to ask why I'm not in a wedding dress." Finn said nothing. Silence without awkwardness, full of understanding. He didn't probe at the past implied in her words. He let it pass, the way a stream runs clear when no hand muddies it. "What poem are you giving them?" he asked at last, laying a small bridge between topics. Wordsworth Grace said, her smile gentling. "A piece about evening light on a lake. I think the light on these grasses is just as fair. Would you read some?" Finn leaned lightly against a pupil's desk, tugged off his gloves. Blue eyes, steady as on a familiar fire. A little shy, she opened her worn book, found the page bookmarked with a sprig of dried pine. She read, her voice low at first, then warm, each word falling to the boards like rain leaving the good smell of earth behind. Gold scattered over the water, the little waves smiling at the shore. When she looked up, Finn didn't clap and didn't offer stock praise. He only nodded with that particular look, the look of a man confirming what he'd long suspected, that beauty shaped into words could make a small wooden room widen to the horizon. "My mother taught me my letters," he said at last. "She passed early. After that, books were something I kept on the saddle to fend off lonesome. I can't read a poem like you, but I can listen. And when you read, I hear it whole." Grace bit her lip. A pleasant warmth spread beneath her breastbone. "Thank you for listening." A child's laughter rang from the yard. The Crowley youngsters were sneaking around the chicken coop, chasing each other till they tumbled giggling. Finn glanced through the window, a smile creasing his eye. "They take this place for a playground. And that's a good sign," Grace said, returning to her professional tone. "A good school is one they run toward, not one they're driven to. I want the room to smell of apples, new wood, and paper. I want them to remember that smell all their lives." "You're getting there," Finn said. "I caught that scent the moment I stepped in." "That's your apple crate," Grace teased, then grew serious, searching his eyes. "Why do you help me? I mean, You've ranch work stock to buy fences to mend. Why do you keep showing up right on time whenever I seem to need it? Finn tipped his head, not to hunt a reason perhaps, but to choose a fitting shape for it. Because I know what it is to stand alone in a strange town. Years back, when I came west, I pitched a tent by the creek. A storm blew in. Doors shut, folks stayed home. No one knocked to ask if I was cold. I learned, no one owes us kindness. So when I can, I pay it forward. Pay it forward, Grace repeated, tasting the words like honey. Or, plant in advance. Plant ahead works, he smiled. If the day comes I need this schoolhouse, maybe you'll open the door for me like I'm opening it now for your map. They both laughed a quiet laugh, warm as herb tea. Outside, the wind shifted. On the wall, the map settled not a sail anymore, simply itself. Grace traced the clean borders with her eyes and thought of the ways folks draw their lives, some lined straight, some broken, some set true only when another hand helps them lie right. Have you been to Boston, New York? She asked, curious about a man both hard-handed and tender-eared for poetry. Passed through, Finn said. Bought stock in St. Louis, rode the train to Cheyenne. Boston. I know the name, not the streets. Likely not a speck of red dust on a coat there. But they have great libraries, reading rooms, 5 stories high. Grace said, gaze far away. I once thought my life would be in a place like that reading all day. Then I learned that sometimes a small classroom with 10 children is the finest library of all. Finn nodded, the nod of a man who chose prairie over pavement. I'd take cattle calling at sundown over iron wheels on stone. I've felt too solitary at times, but lately... He stopped, as if wary of momentum. Lately, less so. Grace didn't ask why less. She knew, though, she wouldn't name it. She bent, straightened the exercise books, and found another thread. Yesterday, Billy spilled ink on my dress, black as tar. Is he the troublesome sort? The laughing sort? And forgetful? His inky hand brushed everything, me and the copybook both. I didn't scold. I told him, next time, be careful your teacher owns only a few dresses. He stared round-eyed, then handed me a piece of cornbread his mama baked and said, Teacher, eat so you won't be mad. I ate and laughed. Finn laughed too, a sound like a riffle on a creek. He's learned the first arithmetic of life compensation. Compensation? Grace arched a brow. Spills 1 unit of ink pays 2 units of cornbread, he said, eyes bright. Result a happy teacher? Cowboy logic. Grace declared, laughing, and realized how easily she laughed when he was near. Sunlight drew back from the floorboards, leaving its last golden threads along the desk edges. Finn set his hat, checked the silver watch on his vest chain. I'd best get back to the ranch before dark. Tomorrow, I'll send over some planks, build a bookshelf. Any volumes, still without a home? Grace stilled hands to her breast. You would build a shelf? If you'd like, he answered, as matter of fact, as posting a name to a chore board. I've a few books to donate too. 1 on horse care, 1 on surveying land. The children might not need them now, but someday one will. They will, Grace said firmly, as if speaking for the future. And, thank you, Finn. He moved toward the door, hand on the latch, then paused. He looked at her a moment longer, not with the boldness of a pursuer, but with the reverence of one who recognizes something fragile and stands a step back lest he break it. Have you eaten? He asked, ordinary words that just then felt weighted with measure. I wouldn't ask you to the saloon too loud. but if you don't mind, I'll stop by Martha's, bring some smoked meat. I've a recipe for beans. You'd cook it better than me surely, but I'd like to try. On your cabin porch. Nothing grand? Grace considered for the space of a heartbeat. In Cedar Creek, such invitations were rarely clean. Here in a room smelling of apples and wood beneath a map newly set straight, the invitation was the simplest thing, two people sharing a warm supper after a day's work. She nodded. I have black tea, she said softly, and honey Martha's. Then I'll bring dark bread, Finn replied, and this time his smile widened. I'll come by at dusk. The door closed. Grace stood very still, listening to her own quiet heart. Outside the porch, bell chimed in the breeze. She turned to the map, even borders winding rivers, small dots, for towns she'd never seen. She touched the speck that was Willow Springs, a point in Montana's pale sweep. Here, she whispered, is where I hang my life straight again. Evening fell quick. Grace tidied the room, swept the floor, gathered chalk dust into a little cloud glowing in the red minutes of sunset. She carried the apple crate to the porch, washed a few, set them on a wooden plate. In the cabin, she lit the small stove. Blue flame danced under the pot water, ticking toward boil. She decanted black tea into a clay pot. Its deep fragrance spread like a warm shawl across her shoulders. Hoofbeats came just as the sky turned violet. Finn stepped up, set down the dark bread and smoked meat on the table, and knocked dust from his boots at the step, small, careful manners. In lamplight, the planes of his face softened. The intensity in his blue eyes gentled into the peace of a man come home from a long day. Hope I'm not late, he said, settling into the wicker chair. Just in time for the tea to steep, Grace answered, pouring for them both. They sat a moment, listening to the roof whisper of wind, like someone telling an old story. Do you always take tea in the evening? Finn asked. I learned it from my mother. She said tea does what a long day didn't have time to do, soften. Grace lifted her cup, blew lightly, and smiled. Do you have a habit like that? I count stars, he said, gaze tipping to the newborn night. Not that I'm one for omens. It's just when I count, I remember I'm alive under a roof so wide, the troubles below shrink. Then take my share tonight, Grace said, and both of them lifted their eyes to the faint sparked sky. Supper was simple and strangely good, dark bread with honey-smoked meat warmed over the flame, black tea, bright and steady. They spoke of things harmless to the heart, this year's apples calves weaned from their dams, children who loved letters more than numbers, and the reverse. Now and then, the talk touched deeper country, his brief word of a mother gone, her mention of a father buried. They crossed those fields with light steps, not trampling, not rushing, like two companions walking pasture at daybreak. When the sky went fully dark, a shooting star stitched a thin white seam. Finn paused his counting and smiled. Some in town would call that a sign. And you, Grace asked. I call it beautiful, he said, and beautiful is enough. The plain answer tightened Grace's throat. Beautiful is enough. She thought of all the years her life had been weighed on other people's scales. Beauty, not enough. Money, not enough. Meekness, not enough. Silence, not enough. And here was someone saying this was sufficient enough to drink tea, to set a map straight, to count stars together. She set down her cup and looked at him a long moment, as if to etch his outline into the porch boards. Near midnight, Finn rose. I'll go. In the morning, if you need, I'll bring those planks. I do, Grace said, and fearing she'd asked too quickly, added the school does. The school? He agreed, a corner of his mouth lifting. The school does. He set his hat step down. The chestnut snorted softly. Before he turned away, he spoke as if planting a seed in the soil. Miss Grace, sometimes a map hung true can change how a man reads the compass. Let me help when it tilts. I will, Grace answered, and this time her voice was sure as oak. I'll call. He touched the brim and rode into the dark. The hoofbeats thinned, leaving a quiet that soothed. On the porch, the teapot cooled. Honey lingered in the air. Grace leaned in the doorway, cup warm in her hands, watching the faint road under a young moon. Inside, the map lay steady, straight, as if to affirm that what once was skewed might yet be set right. She went in and blew out the lamp. In the hush, her heart shone a little brighter, as if someone had lit a candle in a room long sealed. She lay down, pulled up her grandmother's quilt, and closed her eyes. Wind insects, and somewhere the echo of hooves drifted through her memory. On the edge of waking and sleep, she heard herself whisper, "Beautiful is enough," and slept a long, rain-washed sleep. At first, bell next morning the children fluttered in like sparrows. They swarmed beneath the newly straightened map, pointing at names that felt like spells. Texas, Montana. Where is New York teacher? Grace laughed and showed them each place. When she asked, "Who helped me hang this so straight?" they shouted together, "You did, teacher." She meant to explain, to speak of the one who'd helped, but kept the tale to herself, the way one shields a tender shoot from a hard wind. All through lessons, her eyes strayed now and then to the window. Outside, the young sunlight poured clean into the room. On the sill, a boot print showed faint in dust, the cowboy's mark straight as a promise. Each time she saw it, warmth moved through her, not loud, not blazing, only warm, as the hand that held a map's corner against a gust. At noon, while the children bit into apples with bright crunches, Grace sat at the teacher's desk, opened the mark book, and closed it. She drew a scrap of cloth from the drawer and rubbed at the ink stain Billy had made. It had faded. She smiled. They said ink is hard to wash away, but time, warm water, and a little patience could work near miracles. Perhaps hearts were the same time, warmth, patience. That afternoon, when the children were gone, Grace stood before the map alone. She set her fingertip to the line that ran from Cedar Creek to Willow Springs, a long journey, but clear. Then with white chalk, she drew the tiniest line from Willow Springs to Silver Creek Ranch, where a man counted stars and said, "Beautiful is enough." The chalk mark was thin as thread, yet it bound the 2 points, needing no fuss. She blew. Dust rose and glittered again in the late light. She put away the chalk, locked the door. The latch gave its little creak, slipped the key into her pocket, and started toward the cabin. Halfway there, she heard herself kindle a very small plan. Tomorrow evening, she would bake an apple pie from his crate, not to repay, not to balance a ledger, only to keep a new story warm, the way one keeps the fire from dying in the long night. And when she pictured blue eyes brightening at the first slice, her heart gave a secret merry sound, one only she could hear in a very quiet corner of the wide American West. Part 4. The Town Dance. That night, the Willow Springs Hall shone brighter than anywhere Grace had ever seen. From the main street, you could already hear cheerful music spilling out the tumble of laughter, the patter of children racing around the long row of hitched wagons. Paper lanterns hung from the rafters, their amber light drifting like a swarm of great fireflies suspended in the dark. Grace paused before the big wooden doors, fingers unconsciously smoothing the deep blue dress Martha had spent the afternoon altering. Her thick brown hair was swept up, a few soft curls falling by her ears. In Martha's mirror, she had glimpsed for a moment a different woman, gentler, brighter than the one she thought of as herself. But here on the threshold, that fragile confidence felt ready to shatter. Martha nudged her lightly. "Come on, Grace. This is the welcome party for our new school teacher. The whole town wants to meet you." Grace nodded and drew a deep breath. When the doors swung open, light and sound surged over her and carried her in. From the first steps, she felt a dozen gazes land on her, some curious, some indifferent, some keen and measuring. "Is that the new teacher I hear she was jilted 7 times back in Cedar Creek? Well, let's hope she doesn't stir up trouble here." The whispers weren't loud, but they reached her. Grace smiled, kept her back straight, and walked as if none of it touched her. Inside, her heart thudded. Heat rose to her cheeks. Martha steered her to the refreshment tables, introducing her to ranchers' wives and town merchants. They all nodded politely, but their eyes still weighed, testing whether she deserved to be called teacher to their children. Grace answered gently, evenly, yet the sense of not belonging grew. The music played on, but her feet felt heavy. No one seemed to linger long at her side. The doors opened again. A cool gust slipped in, along with a sure, unhurried tread. The room paused a beat as Finn Westfield entered. He wore a crisp white shirt, a black waistcoat that fit his solid frame, dark jeans, and boots buffed to a soft shine. Not the trail-dusted cowboy Grace had met on the stagecoach. Finn tonight carried a quiet polish, steadfast, yet still free as the open range. People called greetings, heads tipped. A few young women blushed and tittered as he passed. Finn returned their smiles, but his bright blue gaze moved quickly over the crowd, then stopped at Grace. She looked down at her glass of sweet punch, as if her heart might leap straight out. By the time she realized he'd crossed the floor, he was beside her. His low, warm voice sounded at her ear. "Miss Barkley, may I have this dance?" For an instant, the hall fell away. Grace lifted her eyes and met the steady, honest look in his. Every whisper, every measuring glance drained of meaning. She faltered. Images of past humiliations flooded up from Cedar Creek. Finn did not press. He simply offered his hand and waited. At last, as if drawn by an invisible thread, Grace set her trembling fingers in his. The murmurs rose at once. Westfield's dancing with the new teacher. He's never asked anyone out front like that. Grace flushed, but Finn's gentle squeeze steadied her as he led her onto the floor. The band struck a lively country reel. Finn's other hand settled at her waist, close enough for her pulse to trip, distant enough to honor her space. "I'm not very good," Grace whispered, eyes on her shoes. "Nor I," Finn smiled. "But at least we'll be clumsy together." The line made her laugh, her first true laugh since entering the hall. The music took her feet. Before long, she was turning lightly, as if her shoes had known this floor all their lives. Within Finn's arms, the prying looks fell away. There was only her heartbeat, the music, and his sure, easy step. The reel ended. The players slid into a slow, tender air. Finn bent his head a fraction. "May I?" Grace nodded. He drew her a little closer, his hand at her back, solid as a shield. For a moment, the world went quiet. She lifted her gaze. His blue eyes were on her, unhurried, unjudging. A kind look and deep that seemed to say, "I see you, truly." Grace's heart trembled. For years she had been pushed aside, refused, found wanting. Here in lantern light, on a crowded floor, one man looked at her as if she were the only soul in the room. When the music faded, applause broke across the hall. Grace stepped back, face glowing. Finn still held her hand, not tightly, just enough to reassure. He bent close, voice a warm rumble. "Thank you for the honor." Grace opened her mouth, but only managed, "And thank you." From across the room, Martha's eyes shone. Other faces bent together, whispering not only with scrutiny now, but with curiosity, even a trace of respect. That night, back in the little cabin behind the school, the music still hummed in Grace's ears. She could still feel Finn's hand around hers. The old anxiety, the old shame seemed thinner, worn through. On the table, the oil lamp burned small, casting her shadow against the rough plank wall. Grace pressed a palm to her chest, where her heart still beat fast. This is the first time she told herself, "I have not felt rejected." Not out of pity, but because someone truly saw me. And so, in the hush of night, with the faint resin scent of the pines breathing in from the far woods, a tiny seed stirred in Grace's heart, new, clean, tender, and fierce. Part 5. Silver Creek Ranch. That morning, the sky above Willow Springs was an uncommon blue. After the night's rain, the world seemed washed clean. Grass along the roadside still held jeweled drops of dew. Grace sat on the small wagon seat, Finn beside her, with the reins in hand. They traveled slowly along the red dirt road leading out of town. "Are you weary?" Finn tilted his head toward her. "Not at all," Grace answered, her hands tightening around the book in her lap. "In truth, I feel more excited than tired." A smile curved Finn's mouth, joy flickering in his eyes. "Good. I hope you'll like the place. Silver Creek isn't the largest ranch in Montana, but it is everything I've poured my years into." Grace looked at him, then hearing in his tone not mere pride, but a deep chord of responsibility. When the wagon crested a gentle rise, the sight before her stole her breath. An entire valley stretched out green as an endless carpet dotted with grazing cattle. Beyond it, low hills rolled away to the distant mountains. A clear stream wound through the meadow, sunlight flashing on it like a silver ribbon. At the valley's heart stood a sturdy two-story house, flanked by a barn, stables, and white fences running as far as the eye could see. Blue smoke drifted from the chimney. The air carried scents of cut hay, horse leather, and the faint sweetness of baking bread. "It's beautiful," Grace whispered. "I've never seen anything like it." Finn drew the horses to a halt, quiet pride in his eyes. "I named it Silver Creek for that stream. When I first came, there was only a tumble-down shack and a stretch of barren land. But I believed, if a man tends the soil, it will not fail him." As the wagon stopped, a woman stepped from the porch. She was sturdy, plainly dressed in brown, her eyes keen but kind. "This is Mrs. Abernathy," Finn said. "She keeps house here. Without her, Silver Creek might have gone back to weeds." The woman inclined her head to Grace, then smiled. "Well, at last, I meet the new school teacher the master speaks of so often." Grace blushed and nodded. The simple words warmed her through. Finn led her about the ranch, past the stables, where horses whinnied into the hay-scented barn, across fields, where fresh grass sprouted. He explained the breeding season, the marks of good stock. He spoke with energy, never boast, each sentence weighted with labor and faith. Some said I was mad he admitted to buy this ground, but I thought if I gave it care, it would give back. And now I can supply beef to the whole town, with room still to grow. Grace listened, her gaze following him across the fields. A man tested by hardship, bound to earth, and heard, yet in every movement he remained plain, steady, true. At last they stopped beside Silver Creek, the stream that gave the ranch its name. The water was so clear, she could see the pebbles on the bottom. Wildflowers trembled in the soft wind along its banks. Finn tethered the horses and spread a blanket on the grass. He poured water from a flask and handed it to Grace. I come here when I need to think, he said, eyes on the running current. It never stops, sometimes gentle, sometimes fierce, but always forward. Grace sat beside him, listening to the ripple, and felt an unexpected calm within. Did you build all this alone? She asked softly. At first, yes. Later I hired a few hands. But most of it, Finn smiled faintly, was by my own sweat. It was hard. But watching the land revive, I knew I'd chosen right. They sat in silence, letting the wind and water speak. Then Finn's voice, low and steady, Grace. I don't want Silver Creek to be only a ranch. I want it to be safe, lasting a home. Not just for me, but for those I love. Grace startled, her heart catching. He did not look at her, only at the stream, as if he spoke to himself. I've lived too many years with only work. But a house, a ranch without laughter, without sharing, it's only earth and wood. Grace lowered her head, full of emotions, without name. For years she had longed for such a place, safe, sheltering. Now, his words touched the deepest place in her. When they returned, Mrs. Abernathy had laid out dinner, golden bread, fragrant beef stew, apples from the garden. They sat around the wooden table, sunlight streaming through the panes. Finn passed her more meat, the gesture simple, thoughtful. Mrs. Abernathy told tales of the times the master had nearly been tossed by bulls, and Grace laughed until her cheeks flushed. The ease of it all, homely and warm, made Grace feel strangely that she had belonged here all along. By the time they left Silver Creek, the sun was leaning west, pouring gold across the valley. The stream shone like a silver band. Grace looked back at the house, the fields, the quiet cattle. In her heart rose something new. Not worry, not shame, but peace, safety. As if, should she stumble one day, this place would be her harbor. Beside her, Finn drove in silence, yet just his presence made the road ahead seem less daunting. That night, back in her little cabin, Grace sat by the oil lamp and replayed each moment at Silver Creek. Inside her, a steadfast hope began to root. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to think perhaps she would not be alone forever. Part 6. The Confession. That evening, Willow Springs burned with color as the sun slid down behind the far mountains. Orange light washed the wooden rooftops, spilled across the damp meadows, and scattered in 1,000 fragments on the creek behind town. Grace's cabin stood quiet at the edge of the schoolyard, its window glowing warm as a lone lantern on the wide prairie. Grace sat on the porch, a steaming cup of tea in her hands. The breeze carried the smell of wet earth and pine. Inside, her unease churned. Since her visit to Silver Creek, since hearing Finn speak of his dream for a lasting home, her heart had not ceased to stir. Part of her longed to believe in it, to step inside that vision. But another part remained bound fast by the shame of her past. 7 times. 7 times abandoned before the altar. 7 times made the jest of Cedar Creek. The whispers, the pitying glances, the nights she wept alone, these scars had never healed. And she feared with all her soul, that if Finn knew, even his gentle gaze would turn. Hoofbeats sounded on the dirt road, pulling her from thought. She looked up to see Finn, riding near tall against the sunset. He dismounted, removed his hat, and smiled. "Am I disturbing you?" His voice was low, steady. Grace shook her head, managed a small smile. "No, I was only watching the sunset." Finn rested a hand on the rail close enough that she could hear his breathing. For a time they stood silent, letting the crimson light flood over everything. Grace, Finn began, "Since the day I met you, something in me has been different. You make me believe Silver Creek can be a true home, not just a ranch. But—" He hesitated, then met her eyes. "I don't want secrets between us." Grace froze. His words, though gentle, touched the deepest wound. She set down her cup, clasped her trembling hands together. It took a long moment before her voice came hoarse with the weight of it. "Finn, there is something I must tell you. No one here knows. But if you wish to know who I truly am, then please listen." He nodded, waiting. Grace drew a breath, her eyes on the horizon turning violet. "Before I came to Willow Springs, I lived in Cedar Creek. There, I was engaged 7 times. The words fell like a stone into still water. Grace's heart hammered, old pain flooding back. 7 times, and each one ended. One said I was too bookish. Another that I was stubborn. Others feared the debts my father left. Each broken promise fed the town's gossip. I became a lesson, a warning mothers told their daughters. Do not be like Grace Barkley." Her voice broke. Tears slipped into her clasped hands. "I came here not only to teach. I came running from pitying stares, from cruel laughter. But I'm so afraid, Finn. Afraid that if you know, you'll leave me too, like every man before." Silence stretched. Grace dared not lift her head. Fear pressed tight, choking her. Then she heard the scrape of a chair. Finn sat beside her. His hand, large and warm, closed over her shaking ones. Gentle, steady. "Grace," he said at last, each word deliberate, "I see no shame in you. The men who left, they lacked courage. They were blind to what is real and strong in you." She raised her tear-filled eyes, met the steadfast blue of his. "I know the wounds are deep," he went on. "But the past does not define you. I am not here to judge or to measure. I am here because I see a woman wise kind, brave enough to begin again. That is the woman I wish to walk beside." His words fell like cool water on parched ground. Grace wept not from disgrace, but from release. One by one, the shells of shame broke away, bearing a heart still fragile yet aching to love. Finn drew her gently against his shoulder. "I cannot promise a life of only fair weather," he murmured. "But I promise this, I will never walk away. If I say, I love it, means for life." Grace trembled in his arms, tears soaking the rough cotton of his shirt. Through the murmur of wind in the pines, she heard his heartbeat, steady, protective, like a vow, without parchment or ink. When the last of the sunset faded and the sky deepened to violet, the first stars appeared. Grace sat quietly beside him, her tears drying her heart warm. In that moment, she knew the past may hold darkness, but it cannot blot out the light of the present. And that light shone now clear and strong in the eyes of the cowboy beside her. Part 7. A Proposal in the Snowstorm. Winter swept into Willow Springs fiercer than Grace had ever imagined. Heavy drifts buried rooftops. The familiar dirt road lay hidden beneath a white ribbon that stretched without end. Outside, the wind howled like a chorus of wolves, lashing the wooden walls with icy whips. That night, Grace remained at Martha and James's house, unable to reach her little cabin. The family gathered close by the fire, its flames dancing across faces flushed with warmth. Yet even amid the cheerful talk, Grace's eyes kept straying to the frost-blurred window, her heart restless. In such a storm, was Finn safe? Cedar Creek lay miles from town. The way back would be perilous. She tried to calm herself. He is a man of the wild. He has lived all his life with storms and cold. No mere blizzard can bring him down. But still, her heart would not settle. A sudden knock sounded cutting through the gale. James hurried to the door. In rushed a blast of snow and wind, and a figure. Finn. He stepped inside his coat, frosted white broad shoulders, trembling with cold. Yet his blue eyes held steady bright. Grace started to her feet, her breath catching. Finn, why would you risk the storm? He smiled his breath, still smoking in the chill air. I couldn't sit at Cedar Creek, knowing you were here. I had to come. There is something I must say. The weight of his gaze hushed the room. Martha glanced toward Grace, her lips curving knowingly, then drew James with her into the kitchen, leaving the two alone by the fire. Finn shed his gloves, rubbed his frozen hands, and sat beside her. The firelight revealed his sun-browned face, ruddy now with cold. He was silent a long moment, as if gathering every ounce of courage. Grace, he began, at last, voice slow and deep. From the day I met you on that muddy road, I knew my life had turned. You are not only the teacher of Willow Springs, you are the light of Cedar Creek, the reason I no longer feel alone. Grace's heart raced. His eyes upon her were not hurried, but certain, as of a man who had thought long before speaking. Finn drew a breath and reached inside his coat. He brought forth a small wooden box, worn smooth with time. Opening it, he revealed a simple gold ring set with a pearl white as snow. This was my mother's wedding ring. Finn said, his voice rough with feeling. She gave it to me with the words, "When you find the woman worthy, place it on her hand." Grace, tonight I would keep that promise. He knelt before her upon the coarse rug by the fire. Outside, the storm raged, but in that little room, time itself stood still. Grace Barkley, I love you. I love your strength, your kindness, even the scars that shaped you. I cannot promise a life without hardship, but I promise to hold your hand through every storm. Will you be my wife? Grace could not speak. Tears blurred her sight. All the pain of rejection, the lonely nights, the doubts of being unworthy melted away. Before her knelt a man who offered his whole heart, declaring her past no burden, but the very thing that made her dearer. Finn, she whispered, her voice shaking. I have waited all my life for this, and if you truly want me, then yes. Yes, I will. Finn's smile broke radiant. Gently, he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit as if it had always waited for her. Grace wept freely, now tears of joy. Finn rose and gathered her into his arms, holding her close. Outside, The blizzard screamed, but within his embrace, Grace had never felt safer. At the kitchen door, Martha and James looked on quietly. Martha brushed her eyes, murmuring, "Do you see, James? At last, Grace has found her true harbor." James nodded, his smile gentle. They slipped away, leaving the lovers by the glowing fire. Finn held her fast, whispering near her ear, "The storm may erase every track upon the road, but it will never erase my vow. From this day, no matter how fierce the weather, I will remain beside you." Grace nodded, pressing her face to his chest. This was no fragile promise, no fleeting word like the 7 broken vows before. This was the oath etched deep in the heart of a true man. By morning, the storm had passed. All Willow Springs lay draped in white rooftops and trees crowned with snow. When Grace opened the cabin door, the cold rushed in, but her soul was warm. On her hand, the pearl glowed, catching the new sun. Finn stood beside her, his hand entwined with hers, his eyes alight with quiet certainty. They spoke no words, only gazed together at the clear sky after the storm. And in that silence, Grace knew she now had a home, a husband, a safe harbor for all her days. Part 8. The Simple Wedding. 2 weeks after the blizzard, Willow Springs awoke to a new anticipation. From the general store to the far ranches, the same words carried the wedding of Miss Grace Barkley, the school teacher, and Finn Westfield, the cowboy. The little wooden church at the town's center plain in every season now bloomed with garlands of pine and sprigs of dried flowers arranged by the women's hands. Outside, snow still blanketed the ground, but footsteps of townsfolk had pressed a path leading straight to the church door, a communal mark of blessing for the couple. In a small room behind the sanctuary, Grace smoothed the folds of her dress, fingers trembling. Martha had labored over it for nights, wool in soft sea green, trimmed with white lace at the collar. It was not the silk of storybooks, not a gown of veils and pearls, but warm, modest, and beautiful. In her hair, Martha had tucked paper snowflowers, making her solemn face suddenly gentle, radiant. "You are lovely, Grace," Martha whispered, her eyes shining. "Finn won't be able to look anywhere else." Grace smiled faintly, though her heart thudded. This moment, one she once thought would never come, was here at last. After all the abandonments, the whispers, she now stood ready to walk into a true wedding. At the front, Finn waited by the pulpit. He wore a crisp white shirt, a dark brown vest, boots, polished hair brushed neat. But what drew every gaze was not his clothes. It was the light in his eyes, steady bright, fixed on the door where his bride would appear. Friends, neighbors, Grace's pupils, even those who once held their distance, filled the pews. All were smiling, eager to see the gentle teacher, once called unwanted, at last claim happiness. The organ's notes rose simple and warm. Grace appeared in the doorway, walking the pine-strewn aisle dusted with snow petals. With no father left to give her hand, James had offered to walk beside her, his step calm and solemn. Finn drew a long breath, his blue eyes gleaming as he saw her. To him, she was not just a woman in a plain dress. She was his future, the home he had longed for. When Grace reached the altar, James placed her hand in Finn's. Finn's quiet squeeze was a vow in itself. From this day, you will not walk alone. The old minister spoke the covenant words, his voice steady as time. Then he looked to Finn. "Do you, Finn Westfield, take Grace Barkley to walk with you the rest of your days, through joy and trial, through blizzards of winter and burning summers, until life's end. Finn answered without pause, "I do, and I vow to keep that promise to my last breath." The minister turned to Grace. "And do you, Grace Barkley, take Finn Westfield to share life with him, in love and faithfulness until life's end?" Tears glimmered at Grace's lashes. She nodded, her voice trembling, "But sure I do. For he is the home I have found after years of wandering." When the minister declared, "I pronounce you husband and wife before God and this community," the little church erupted with clapping and cheers. Finn lifted Grace's chin and kissed her a long, tender kiss that sealed their vow. In that moment, the world beyond vanished. There was only two hearts joined as one. Grace trembled not from cold, but from joy complete. This was no dream. This was real, the beginning she had once despaired of ever having. Afterward, the town gathered at the small hall. On the tables lay no feast of grandeur, but simple dishes, fresh bread, beef stew, apple pie. Yet for Finn and Grace, no banquet could have felt richer. Glasses were raised, blessings spoken. Children darted about the floor, while a fiddle sang out country tunes. Finn drew Grace to the center, and together they danced a clumsy waltz but radiant. "Are you trembling?" Finn murmured. "No." Grace smiled this time. "I tremble from happiness." When the evening ended, they left to shouts and laughter. The sky was clear, the moon spreading silver across the snow. Finn helped her into the wagon, his hand never leaving hers. At Silver Creek Ranch, the house glowed with firelight. Mrs. Abernathy had prepared the hearth, laid thick blankets, and placed a vase of flowers on the table. Grace stepped inside, breathing the scents of pine and fresh bread. It was more than a house, it was a home, the rest she had searched for across lonely years. That night, in the small room, under moonlight, she whispered, "Finn, I never believed I would see this day." He drew her close, answering softly, "And I never wished for more than to call you my wife." Outside, snow fell soundless, cloaking the prairie in white. But within the wooden walls, a new beginning was written, simple, whole, and warm. Part 9. The Little Angel Arrives. A year after their simple wedding, Silver Creek Ranch wore a new face. The meadows stretched green, and full herds of fattened cattle grazing beneath the golden afternoon sun. The cozy wooden house of Finn and Grace no longer held only the sounds of conversation, of books being read, or horses nickering in the stables. It now brimmed with expectancy, awaiting the moment a small angel would enter the world. Grace, her hair tied neatly at the nape and her cheeks rosier than before, sat by the window, one hand resting lightly on her rounded belly. For months now, every gentle kick had sent her heart trembling with joy and fear alike. Once she had feared she would never have a family. Now, she was about to become a mother. Finn kept to his daily rhythm, rising at dawn, tending the ranch. But whenever he saw Grace smiling to herself, his eyes softened. He would cross to her, lay his calloused palm upon her belly, and whisper, "Little one, it's your father. I'm waiting for you." On a cold night at the end of October, the first pain struck. Grace doubled over, clutching her stomach, sweat beading on her brow. "Finn," she gasped. He was at her side in an instant. One look was enough, he knew the time had come. He mounted at once, galloping off into the storm to fetch Dr. Wilson and Martha. Inside the small bedroom, the lamplight cast its warm glow, but could not ease the tension. The contractions came fierce and fast, leaving Grace exhausted. Martha gripped her hand tight, whispering encouragement. "Hold on, Grace. Just a little more. You're stronger than you think." Out in the hall, Finn paced so hard he nearly wore a path in the wooden floor. He longed to rush in, but Dr. Wilson stopped him with firm words. "Leave it to them. This is women's battle. You must trust them." Toward dawn, the autumn storm raged outside, rain and wind lashing the windows. Inside, Grace labored with ragged breath while Martha urged her on. And then it came. Wah, wah, wah. The cry of a newborn, piercing, defiant, cutting through wind and rain as though declaring a new age had begun. Finn burst into the room, tears flooding his eyes, as Martha lifted a tiny red-faced baby girl, her fist no larger than his thumb. Grace, drained and drenched with sweat, glowed with radiance when the doctor laid the child in her arms. "Finn," she whispered, her voice weak but filled with love. "Come meet our daughter." He stepped forward, heart pounding, fit to burst. Gazing at the infant, he reached out with trembling hand to touch her soft cheek. Tears spilled freely down his rugged face. "My little girl, so beautiful," he choked. Grace looked up, her weary eyes shining. "I want to name her Elizabeth Hope Westfield. Elizabeth for your mother. And Hope because she is the proof that good things come, even after all the losses." Finn bent to kiss her brow, murmuring, "The finest name I have ever heard." The days that followed were filled with laughter and cries. Finn, awkward as a cowboy, could be fumbled with swaddling and diapers, his once fearless face twisted with panic, while Grace laughed through her fatigue, wiping spilled milk from her daughter's lips. At night, little Elizabeth would wake, her blue eyes so like her father's wide in the dark. Finn would carry her out to the porch, humming an old country tune until she drifted back to sleep in his arms. Grace, watching from the doorway, felt her heart brim with love. The man who had once faced storms alone now had a home, and she was his companion in it. One winter morning, snow blanketed the roof in white. Grace sat by the hearth with Elizabeth sleeping in her arms. She whispered, as if to herself, "All the pain I ever knew. It led me here. If not for those failures, I might never have met Finn. And this child, she is our miracle." Finn sat down beside her, wrapping his arms around both mother and child. He kissed Grace's brow, then the downy head of his daughter. "Yes," he said, steady and sure. "She is hope. She is the continuation of all this love." Outside, the winter wind blew sharp and cold, but inside the wooden house, with the crackling fire, the soft breath of the baby, and Finn's warm embrace, it was heaven itself. Grace closed her eyes, smiling. She was no longer the woman rejected 7 times in Cedar Creek. She was Grace Westfield, wife to Finn, mother to Elizabeth, a woman cherished and respected. Above all, she had found her true home, where the past was not a burden, but the foundation of a bright future. And beyond the window, dawn rose. Light spilled over Silver Creek Ranch, illuminating 3 figures by the window, a family, a beginning, and an endless hope. Part 10. The Everlasting Home. Years after the first cry of Elizabeth Hope, Silver Creek Ranch had changed beyond recognition. The ranch had expanded, the herd had tripled, and the granaries overflowed. Yet what Grace cherished most was not the prosperity, but a new room in the house, the library. Finn had kept his promise. He built a sunlit room, paneled in pale wood, with high ceilings and wide windows opening to the fields. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with Bibles, novels, poetry, arithmetic, primers, and science texts. In the center stood a long table with small chairs for the children. It was more than a library. It was the heart of Silver Creek's home. Elizabeth was no longer alone. Twin boys, William and James, had arrived as wild and quick as the wind. And most recently, another little girl had been born named Martha in honor of the cousin who once took Grace in during her loneliest days. The house was never silent, full of laughter, pounding footsteps, and the quarrels of children. But for Grace, every sound was a blessing of peace. Evenings were spent in the library. Finn sat by the fire with Elizabeth on his lap, reading aloud tales of frontier adventures. The twins jostled for space beside their mother to practice their letters. Baby Martha cooed in her cradle, giggling whenever her siblings made a noise. Grace was no longer the school teacher of Willow Springs, but she remained the most devoted teacher of all within her own family. She taught Elizabeth to read lines of poetry, guided William and James through the patient art of forming words. Finn, for his part, taught them to ride horses, to tie ropes, and above all, to keep their word. One golden evening, Finn sat on a fence rail with William. The boy asked Father, "How do you become a good man?" Finn smiled gently. A good man isn't one who never makes mistakes. He's one who admits them, makes them right, and never abandons someone who needs him. From a distance, Grace overheard. Tears pricked her eyes. Her children were growing up surrounded by love and honesty, the very gifts denied her in Cedar Creek, but now flowing strong, as steady as the stream that named their ranch. At times on quiet nights, Grace would sit by the library window, gazing at the moonlit fields. Finn would come, his arms wrapping around her. The wounds of her past still visited her dreams, but with him beside her, they dissolved into nothing. "You know," she whispered once, "if even one of those 7 men had kept his promise, I might never have met you." Finn chuckled, kissing her hair. "Then I thank them all. Their loss gave me the chance to find life's greatest treasure." Grace laughed through tears. Yes, every rejection, every humiliation had been nothing more than a step leading her here. One winter evening, with snow drifting outside, the family gathered in the library. Elizabeth read aloud a passage from Wordsworth. William and James showed off their clumsy scrawls, and little Martha banged her tiny fists on the table like a miniature conductor. Finn sat at the center, his eyes bright with pride, while Grace looked around, her heart overflowing with gratitude. Once she had thought a home was an impossible dream. Now it stood before her, a steadfast husband, children full of wonder shelves lined with books, and laughter filling the air. No wealth, no grandeur was needed, only this. And this was eternal. Beyond the walls, winter winds swept across the wide prairie, as on the day Grace had first arrived in Willow Springs. But she was no longer alone. In the wooden house, the fire glowed, warming the faces of those she loved most. She leaned against Finn's shoulder, whispering, "I am thankful for it all, for the pain that led me here, for your hand that never let go, for this family, for us." Finn tightened his embrace. "This is forever, Grace. This home, this family, this love. Forever." Snow fell white upon the ranch, but inside, love and faith burned bright, a fire that would never fade. Thus, Grace's story, once defined by rejection, did not end with a final period, but with the opening of an everlasting chapter. As the Montana sun sank behind the mountains, casting the prairie In a blaze of orange, the Westfield family gathered on the porch. Finn sat on the steps, with Elizabeth leaning on his shoulder, reciting poetry. William and James chased each other across the yard. Baby Martha sat laughing in Grace's arms. No whispers of scorn, no shadows of the past, only laughter, only eyes full of love. To Grace, it was everything healing after years of pain, proof that every closed door had been leading her here to her true home. Finn wrapped his arms around his wife and children. "We've weathered the storms," he said softly. "Now this sunset belongs to us." Grace smiled, lifting her gaze to the radiant sky. In the Montana twilight, she knew she had found her place, not the coldness of Cedar Creek, but here at Silver Creek, where love endured and the home was eternal.